So we have almost 500 participants in the session now. Almost 500 participants have joined, and the panel of experts is also ready. So if I have the permission of our director sir and our external speaker, can we start the session, sir?
Yes, of course, Dr. Nikhil. Good morning, all the students and the team members. Request to be to lend your ears for some time, and this is a wonderful session we are going to have. I would request Dr. Nikhil to just introduce our guests for the day to all the students, so that we can proceed further.
Thank you, sir. So as sir said, let me begin with a small introduction of our expert speaker. Our expert speaker for the day is Mr. Manas Das. He has over 30 years of industry experience and has worked in various functions like strategic planning, change management, leadership and development, marketing, business development in various organizations. He has spent a lot of time with Gas Authority of India Limited, GAIL. That is when I came in touch with him when I was working with CMIE, and we had a professional association at that time. After GAIL, Mr. Das has spent some time with Kuwait Petroleum Corporation also, which is one of the largest oil companies in the world. Mr. Manas Das is a chemical engineer from IIT Kanpur and an MBA in international business from IIFT. He is passionate about teaching, and he teaches strategy and change management at almost all the top business schools. Currently, Mr. Manas Das has started his own consulting firm by the name ValuEndow Consulting. It is a leadership firm in management and is based out of Greater Noida. So that is a small introduction about our speaker of the day. And as you all can see, and as has been communicated to all, the topic of today's webinar is scenario planning to address the uncertainties of the future, which I think is a very, very pertinent topic to discuss on at the, during the times we are in today. So without much ado, I would not take much of the time of the participants and the panelists, and would request Mr. Manas Das to please start with his session, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Nilesh Arora, for giving me this chance to come here and speak on this particular subject. Thank you, Dr. Nikhil Varghese, for giving a wonderful introduction. Thank you, the panelists. And let me just come across directly to the presentation, and we'll start with the session on scenario planning. Now, scenario planning is a wonderful tool, specifically when you work on strategy development. In many of the organizations which are open to debate and give an open space for deliberations and dialogue, to understand and then understand the uncertainties part, and why is so much pertinent, as Dr. Nikhil has highlighted. We'll come to that as well. And it has now become almost a must component in strategy development and strategy testing exercise. Also to assess the future big investments when you look at, or maybe some of the policy level issues that you want to deal with. A little disclaimer about this particular session that we have today. It is primarily for the Chandigarh University students, and just to give a hint of what it is all about, scenario planning, what it is all about, and we'll introduce about this tool. In this limited time frame that we have, we can only have a bird's eye view of the tool scenario planning. But for a detailed understanding and skill building exercise, we will have a certificate program, and you can join if you want. For the business professionals, if any, joining in this particular webinar today, you can, if you need some advice, you can directly contact us, ValuEndow Consulting. Now, how we have structured today's discussion is that we'll first look into the approach of looking at future. And then how we are influenced by the past and the present, and then what is it, the new thing about scenario planning exercise, and we'll also talk about the process of it a little bit, not getting into details, and also give some examples for the students so that they also can connect easily what it is all about, and then we'll have some time, Nikhil, if you permit me, maybe at the end, maybe 15 minutes or so on the Q&A session. So this is what the structure that we have prepared. So let's look at one gentleman. This gentleman is Charles Franklin Kettering. He's an American scientist, engineer, businessman, and an inventor. And he has a good 186 patents in his name. Some of the big patents that he has is in terms of, let's say, the electrical starting engine or the leaded gasoline. He was the head of research in General Motors for quite some time, number of years, and also the founder of Delco. He also invented the freon gas, which is being used in fridge and an AC system. He says, my interest is in future because I'll be there, I'll be spending the rest of my life there. And that goes all with, well, with everybody, each one of us. The moment you say present, the present is just a flick of a second, and then you are getting into the future. So everything that you are working on, your aspiration to achieve something in future is in the future. So that drives you. There is something significant yet to be achieved. That is what drives us, each one of us. But how do you look at future? The question is, how do you look at future? Because we are influenced by the past. Let's say, talk about career choosing. Are you really sure about what kind of businesses will be there in coming 10 to 15 years time frame? I'll put up a question, a poll question, which is there, and it is about, will the printed newspaper exist in next 15 years from now? Sadhguruji, I will not be having access to the screen because I am running the presentation. If you can please facilitate the first question, which is question 3, about do you think that 15 years down the line, newspaper will be there? I'm not going to influence you, but in general, the approach today we have is we get push notifications in our handheld devices, and immediately you get a news anywhere in the world, anything happening, you're getting that. Will you wait for the morning newspaper to come in and read through? So it's a question that, do you see in future 15 years that would that be a possibility? You can have your own perception. Now, the poll that I see here is no says 51%, yes says 31%, can say 18%. That's perfectly fine. We are not really sure whether it will be there. Nobody has seen the future. Similarly, let's say, for example, the pen. I use it very rarely when I have to sign. Most of the work that we do these days are on computer. It's on computer itself or on mobile devices. So these are the things maybe you will see kind of discontinuity coming in. And that's the question that we need to look at. Things that, let's say, for example, what kind of education system should I give to my children if I don't know what kind of social structure will be there in the future? So these are the big questions, we try to answer. How do you look at future? There's one way of looking at future is by forecasting. You have something in the past, and generally we do it this way. In companies, we do that. This is the past trend. Maybe the company is growing at 10%, 12%, and we take an average, and then we extend it to the future. And that is purely the definition of forecasting. We extrapolate from the past, and that is the sense of forecasting. But the saying goes, a trend is a trend is a trend until it bends. And this is why the bends are there is the key area that we need to focus on. Bends are the area where it gives you the, opens up the risks, opens up the opportunities for you. So we need to be focused around where the possibility of bends coming in. And that is why the process of forecasting is very limited aspect of, extending the past to the future. We need to have a broader view of what are the possibilities, or what are the discontinuities, what are the uncertainties are there that can come up. And That leads us to the, in general, what we do, the approach is maybe today's growth rate is at let's say 7%. You add a little bit, 1 or 2%, and you have an optimistic base case and a pessimistic case. This is what we do in forecasting part. But scenario planning gives a much bigger dimension when we look at it. Let's talk about the COVID pandemic. COVID pandemic, and that is why it has stirred everyone, shaken everyone. COVID pandemic in India, the case is like this, that because of this, the unemployment today has increased 26%. 14 crore people have lost their employment. Half of the households have reported some loss in their income. Almost half of the business houses, they are affected, 53%. These are all data from CMI, Scroll, and Liveman. So the impact in India, it is not only in India, across the world. If you see, the stock markets have collapsed. The Japanese Nikkei has reduced by 15%. Dow Jones, the US one, reduced by 19%. The UK FTSE 100 reduced by 25%. So it has impacted world over. In US, if you see, the unemployment rate was 3.7% before this pandemic, and it has reached to 14.7%. With an additional, people have registered for unemployment benefits. 30 million people have registered for it. So the impact is huge. Talk about the travel, talk about the flight, talk about the food, talk about the hospitality. All the industry segments have gotten impacted. Electricity generation and the consumption has reduced. In Italy, it has reduced by 25%. France, it has reduced by 22%. In UK, the impact is 12%. So all the industries have got impacted. If you look at the oil and gas, from which I belong to, there is a study which says that the E&P companies' revenue will get impacted by $1 trillion. Imagine, from $2.47 trillion, if $1 trillion is the impact on the revenue generation of the E&P companies, such a huge 40% impact over there.
Mr. Das, if I can please interject, there is a very interesting question from one of the students.
Yeah.
With your permission, sir. The name of the student is Anuj Bansal, and it's a very interesting question that Anuj is asking. He says the Prime Minister is promoting local for vocal campaign. Now he is talking about local for vocal and asking all of us to go for the Swadeshi and domestic brands. So the question is, as all of you know that world is in recession, I want to know that will it affect the MBA students, or there will be better opportunities than before? And in brackets, he says local for vocal.
Very true. The way he also articulated in his last address, the opportunity is actually coming to India. If you look at China, most of these people, the US is actually now, maybe closing doors from the services from, some of the manufacturing sectors are getting shifted from China to other countries. India is one of the prominent country where you will have the next activity coming up, India, Vietnam, and countries like that. So the coming up, all the activity, I would rather see that going forward, the Atmanirbhar campaign and all that, I see the future of the MBA students are bright here, because we'll see a lot of activity, business activity coming up in India, because there is no other destination. See, you cannot go on forever with this particular situation, the kind of disruption that we have seen. The life will come back, and livelihood also will come back. So the MBAs will have a much bigger future, much better, brighter future here in India. So Anuj, if I have answered your question. Okay, so can we move on, Nikhil?
Sure, sir. Yes, please. Yes, sir.
Let's get back to this particular question. And is it that nobody has seen this happening? There is one very interesting video I have seen, and I would like to share with you. The question, when
President Trump also likes to say that nobody saw the pandemic coming. Really? Well, here's a warning from President Barack Obama back in 2014.
There may and likely will come a time in which we have both an airborne disease that is deadly. And in order for us to deal with that effectively, we have to put in place an infrastructure, not just here at home, but globally, that allows us to see it quickly, isolate it quickly, respond to it quickly. So that if and when a new strain of flu, like the Spanish flu, crops up 5 years from now or a decade from now, we've made the investment. And we're further along to be able to catch it.
And guess what? The former president was not politicizing the possibility of a pandemic on the horizon. He was sending a message to Congress at the time that a deadly pandemic is not a partisan issue.
I cannot think of a better example of an area where we should all agree than passing this emergency funding to fight Ebola and to set up some of the public health infrastructure that we need to deal with potential outbreaks in the future. How do you argue with that? That is not a partisan issue. That is a basic common sense issue that all Americans can agree on. For the most part, people have recognized this is not a Democratic issue or a Republican issue. It's about the safety and security of the American people. So let's get it done. This can't get caught up in normal politics. We need to protect the American people, and we need to show the world how America leads.
I'll just stop here. The video actually shows so clearly that, it is coming from a state head talking about the scenario. And this is exactly the scenarios are. It's not a definitive picture of the future, but an alternative picture. And you need to get prepared so that, you get your policies, your investments, your strategy, your, everything lined up so that you get ready. If anything of this nature comes up, you are well prepared. So that is what I wanted to highlight. And Sadhguruji, I'll request you to put up another question is about scenarios are about impossible stories of future. Is it true or false? So scenarios are about impossible stories of future. Is it true or false?
Sadhguruji, can we have that poll, please?
Yeah, he has already put in.
Okay.
And I see some results. Respondents are saying 66% they say that scenarios are about impossible stories of future, and 35% they say that this is false. So this is what an indication. But anyway, we good one. We'll get into deeper of what scenarios are. Thank you so much, Guruji. Will
sir, before we move on, there is another interesting question from Rishabh Nangia. And he wants to know the impact of the pandemic on the oil and gas sector, a sector in which you yourself has spent a lot of time in while you were with GAIL and your stint in Kuwait as well. So can you please elaborate a bit on the impact of the pandemic on the oil and gas sector?
Sure. The number is something like this, almost 50 to 60%. The last slide also talks about it. It shows that 50 to 60% of the market capitalization they have lost. The erosions, 50 to 60% of market capitalization got eroded because of this pandemic. And I also quoted a number specifically for the ENP section that they are losing some $1 trillion of revenue generation. Halliburton, some days back I saw news that they are actually striking off some, laying off some 1,000 people. So it's kind of an atmosphere of fear because the demand has come down. And, we need to see when that demand again comes back and the engine is started back. So hope that is the kind of number that I have tried to talk about, and impact on the oil and gas industry. Now this person, Get Davis is the World Energy Council executive chair, and he was for a long period he was the head of scenario planning division in Shell, one company which is known for its scenario planning. And his definition is scenarios are plausible, pertinent, alternative stories of the future. Plausible means possible. or probable. Pertinent means relevant. So these are possible future, possible stories of the future. You cannot really say that, no, this is not possible. The moment you say this is impossible, you are ending the dialogue out there. So scenarios are plausible, pertinent, alternative stories of the future. It actually helps us to prepare ourselves with the business discontinuity. Are you prepared? Let's say, for example, we have seen in our generation, people who are in our 50s and all, we have seen many inventions coming in and going out, right? We have seen many of these things, new technology we have seen, there is a transition. I remember when I was there in college, we used to have those floppy disks, which was 360 kilobyte. And now you have pen drive, which you have, gigabytes in size. You see that kind of a transition that we have in our lifetime. It actually talks about, it envisages the discontinuity, and we need to be prepared for that. The more you are prepared for it, you can actually get yourself, if you are in that particular business, you can see the risk. If you're not in that new businesses, you can actually, get the opportunities built into your strategy formulation. So that is how we need to look at it. An organization which keeps its eyes and ears and thinking open, and we call them as learning organization, they're open to change. They open to discuss, and these are the organization they survive for decades. And we need to have those organizations today which can survive the business discontinuity or things like pandemic that we see today. In fact, today another cyclone landing in India, we need to be prepared. If some such scenario comes in, how do you keep yourself ready? How do you keep yourself ready? It actually helps us to avoid the tunnel vision. And specifically, I'll come to this, because the moment you ask somebody, a senior person in a business, he would say that I have spent 2 to 3 decades in this particular business, and I have in and out knowledge of everything. But that is what the core issue is. If you just have a structured view of the industry, you are dead. You need to have the fresh ideas coming in from the youngsters. What are the possibilities? What are the new possibilities? You have to talk about technology. You have to talk about innovation. You have to think about the new things in the horizon, and then only you will be able to sustain the future. So you need to avoid the tunnel vision, that one single picture of the future. Get more ideas. When you have your team built in for scenario planning, you need to have diversified views. You need to have somebody from the economics, somebody from the politics, somebody from this technology side. Have your team put together who can come up with diversified views of the future. So it avoids tunnel vision. And also the corporate vulnerability, specifically about possibilities of new strategic positioning or long-term investment or the policy development. See, in oil and gas sector, let me just give an example. Gas sector, a broad level, a mediocre level investment would be something around $10 billion. It will take from project investment decision to the project put in place, it will take around 5 to 6 years, and then maybe 20 to 25 years the project will run. So this is the time horizon that you are looking at. When you are conceptualizing a project, you need to have that idea. What are the issues that can come up, that can crop up? So you need to get prepared on all those alternative stories of the future. So, and it may not be that way for other industries. Let's say for ITES industry, the cycle is much smaller, maybe 3 to 5 years. In that domain, in that period, you will see lot many products coming in, lot many competitors coming in, lot many technology discontinuities would come in. So we need to be prepared with what are the next thing that is in the horizon. So your vulnerability will be addressed. It also challenges the mental maps that we have. And that there is a wonderful story that I'd like to share with you. Some time back, some 4,000 students were asked across 49 countries. They were asked that, what is your worldview? How do you see the world? What is the world map? Now, people from US, they put a US-centric, America-centric map. Europe, they put an Europe-centric map. And Asia, put Asia-centric map. One student from Australia, he put an Australia-centric map, in which the Australia is at the top. And you see that, South America, US and Russia at the downside of it. So it is, what you see depends on where you are. This clearly depicts that we are so much influenced by our present. And that influences us. And we need to have a wider debate when we talk about scenario development. Otherwise, the whole exercise of scenario development is just farce. It helps us to identify, anticipate risks. It also helps us to capitalize on the opportunities. So I would request Sadhguruji again, once again, to put up the third question, which is on scenarios can be used for strategy development, strategy evaluation, anticipate risk involved, or large-scale investment, or all of the above. What can be? Yes, fantastic. So I see most of the people, 80% or so, are actually getting into that stage of saying yes, all of it. It can be. I'm very, very happy that all of you see that this can be used for all of these purposes. While in strategy development, or once you have developed a strategy, your new scenario has developed, you cross-check whether that your strategy stands valid with the new scenarios, and maybe the assessment of the long-term investment that you can think of. So you have to do these exercises or maybe the long-term policy development. You have to do scenario planning, get into this mode of scenario planning. Thank you so much.
Once again, sorry to interject, sir, but we are getting bombarded with a lot of questions from the students.
Yeah,
and one very pertinent question which I thought that I should ask you is from Aman of MBA. And Aman wants to know, is capitalism a roadblock in stopping the pandemic? Because we understand that, the cases are increasing every day, but there is a pressure on the government and on everyone to start business economic activity once again. So it's a very good question. Is capitalism a roadblock in stopping the pandemic? What do you think, sir?
I am not really expert on this particular subject, but the point here is, let's have an open idea. We can scenario is all about debate. You can have your own perspective. I can have my own perspective. But here, the dialogue must go on. Now, there were signals. In fact, the countries like Taiwan and Singapore, they were very well prepared because they had the past, the experience that they had. And that is why they were prepared with what if some such scenario happens. So they quickly get into the mode of how you can put in, more of checking, more of testing, and the medical support system. Now, capitalism, in a sense, do you see a business opportunity out of it? The way I look at it, there is a conflict between nation and capital. In a sense, the nations, and we are actually seeing a transition. The business entities in some such pandemic situation, you will see that the dialogue is now, you need to safeguard your nation first. Nation first comes in. If you see, most of the political leaders are talking about, we need to isolate first. We need to think about our own people. Now the business has come into the backstage, you see. But in this whole, the period of this transition, some of the people also look at, they are positive in mindset. They're also trying to get this opportunity encashed. So there are people who are taking advantage of the situation. But capitalism, I would rather say, gives an opportunity. If there is any business opportunity, it fosters, it supports. If nation comes first, there are countries, let's say, for example, this is an open, and maybe someday it will, there are countries, okay, North Korea. Have you heard anything about North Korea? Not really. You don't know what is happening out there. So the point here is, the more you give opportunities for businesses to come up, businesses are something like this. If you give scope, it will naturally come up. There is some opportunity, somebody will come as a business opportunity. I would rather say that capitalism rather supports if there is. We'll come to some of the scenarios which we developed in Kuwait Petroleum, and we'll talk about much deeper the dilemma between nation and capital. We'll come to it. It's a wonderful question, Aman. Can we move, Nikhil?
Sure, sir.
So next is about the broad level steps. How do you develop? How do you use the scenarios? While talking about, I will not get into the details of it. Hope we are in time. The steps that building scenarios involve are broadly defining your scope, identifying driving forces. These are jargons. I'll explain all this. shortlisting key driving forces, and then build scenarios. Now, defining scope is pretty easy. Defining scope is what is the core issue that you're going to deal with? What is the core issue? For industries, it may be different. You can actually develop scenarios for India. You can develop scenarios for any particular business entity or any other NGO also. So defining scope is very much important. What is it that the management or the people that doing the scenario planning exercise is really looking at? Defining the scope, defining the time horizon. Is the entity limited entity, specific geography or a country, or worldwide, international? So those are the things that you need to look at. Maybe you need to ask some questions. What are the future capabilities that we need to build? So those are the defining scope part. You need to have discussions with your top management. You need to build up your team, 30 to 35 people from diversified background, come together, and they are given the task of scenario development. So that is one. Second step is about identify the driving forces. You are the MBA students, so you'll be knowing, in general, we talk about PESTLE, political, economical, social, technological, legal. All these, the factors, the external factors which influence your business are the driving forces. Now, not all driving forces are relevant to scenario planning. Let me warn you that. Because some of the driving forces, let's say, for example, the birth rate, you have a definitive number across geographies, across countries. You don't need to have scenario planning for that, right? You need to have specific driving forces or the external forces which you need to take care of, which are uncertain or which is not predictive. So those are the driving forces that we'll be looking at. And then you put those driving forces. I'll show you some example how this has been done. You identify those driving forces, and then you shortlist the driving forces in terms of impact versus uncertainty. You can put those into different buckets, and in general, you can put it into geopolitical issues or economic issues or things like that, technological issues and all. And then you create alternatives, two spectrum ends. Let's say, for example, 4 buckets of driving forces. You can create 4x4, 16 scenarios, and you talk about it. And then of that, you need not pick up all those scenarios. You pick up 2 or 3 or 4, and then get into deeper of the interrelations of these driving forces. I'll just make it simple. When you watch a movie, you have characters. You have hero, you have villain, you have heroine, you have so many characters out there, right? A scenario is a novel. Scenario is a narration of how those characters interplay. And similarly, in business case, the driving forces, how these driving forces interact and create a future. And that is what it happens in reality. Those driving forces interact with each other and create a possibility. And that is how the scenarios are developed. So you shortlist the key driving forces in terms of, once again, I'll tell, it is about impact versus uncertainty. You pick up those driving forces which are high on uncertainty and impact. Okay? And then you build scenarios. You pick up and you have in detail the narration of it. How do you see from today's context to that particular scenario, how the storyline goes on? So that is what the building scenarios. You give a name, interesting name, so that is very catchy. And people, when you sell it to your management, it becomes, the communication is very easy. People are talking about this particular scenario. In shale context, there were scenarios like Tina. There is no alternative. Now they're talking about Sky. So these scenarios are identified by the name itself. So you have to have that script ready. You have to have that names ready. You try to discuss within your team, outside your team, and that is how the scenarios are built. Now, once you have built, you have to explore the implication. If some such possibility comes in, what is the impact? What is the impact for us as MBA students? So you need to understand impact for, let's say, Chandigarh University. So you need to explore the implication. What is, if that is the scenario coming up, then you need to look at what is the implication of financial or anything of that sort, or the employment or things like that. And then the 6th step, which is the last step, is about very important. And there, in fact, when in my last engagement with Nikhil, I got a lot many help from Nikhil, is about environment scanning. When you have already done the scenario, it is important to scan the environment. And let's say, for example, you are moving from Delhi to Chandigarh. You have milestones on the way, right? let's say 100 miles, 200 miles, things like that. And then those are the milestones. If you've identified in the scenario, you put those milestones in place. These are called signposts. And as you move forward in time, you need to check back. Are we moving in the direction of Chandigarh, or are we moving in the direction of Haridwar? So I'm just, for simplicity's sake, I'm trying to talk about two scenarios. So these are the signposts which will guide you, that warning you that these are the scenarios is coming. Are you prepared? Are you prepared? So you need to have your policies, your investment, your thinking all ready in terms of which signpost you're crossing. So in summary, these are the steps that we generally use for scenario planning development. I'll give you some examples. The last
go ahead with the examples. There is one very interesting question from a faculty member, a faculty colleague. He's Professor Bishwaranjan Kumar. Sir, he wants to know, he's asking, scenario planning has been held hostage in the hands of few because nobody could plan a scenario where poor people will die in transit. So especially this is, and to adding to his question, sir, the chief ministers of various states are saying that they do not have the wherewithal to do what they want to do because most of the things are being dictated by the center. So in this light, sir, can you please throw some light on this, sir?
Okay, let me just come back to it. In this particular situation, it is not scenario planning game. Scenario planning, you have to give time. It is firefighting. When firefighting happens, you are on urgency. You have to have not long-term strategy will be there, to guide you. You have to take your call on the move. And I don't want to get into politics part, differences between center and the state. That's a different domain altogether. It's a phase of firefighting. And I would rather pray that best senses prevail. Scenario planning is where you need to talk about the future, which is on a long term, not a short term basis, not an immediate term. Immediate term does not, scenario planning will not help you in never. It will help you in immediate term kind of decision making process. When you talk about medium to long term, scenario planning is the tool to use. And yes, Vishwaranjanji, it is you need to get that tool, you need to get updated with this particular thing for your futures, all alternatives to be developed. I hope I responded to that question. I'll give you some examples, and this is what I am talking about from a company where I worked with, and these are the examples of the driving forces that we talked about. We plot these in terms of high impact, and we have a big team out there, and we did this exercise, and we plotted what all driving forces are coming in. Although you will see that many of these are coming in, populating there in the high impact and high uncertainty quadrant, and you can actually give some numbers to it to identify this. And because this is a Middle East company, so you will see the OPEC quotas coming in a big way. You will see the economic crisis. We actually talked about India's stability as one of the driving forces, China's stability and other forces. So while we developed this, identified the driving forces, these are the pictures when we deliberated at length why we say that these are the driving forces. And then we put them into 4 clusters: geopolitics, economics, technology, and regulation. And when we did that, I'll request Sadhguruji to put the 4th question on, and then I'll discuss also how this is done. So what we did is we put those identified which are high uncertain and highly high impact area, put them into 4 buckets. And then the question result has come up, and it says scenarios are powerful tools to address what is both high urgency, not really, urgency and impact. You see, it is actually coming back to the last question. Urgency is where scenario planning will not help you. Scenario planning, you need to give time and research to this. It is from medium to long term timeline where you need to look at scenarios, which is uncertain. So intentionally I put that word urgency. Urgency is not the area where you need to get help from scenarios. So what we did, thank you so much. So what we did is we put them into four big buckets, and then we saw the extremes of all these four buckets, and these are the ones. Geopolitics, we talked about level of nature of geopolitical system, economic structure and direction between macroeconomics view. And this is where the globalization and the fragmenting we discussed. Maybe we are facing into the fragmented world. We have talked about technology, whether it is accelerating innovation or there is some kind of a resource depletion, regulated world, whether that regulatory environment will be put in place, it will be sophisticated, it will be effective, or it will be ineffective. And then you created all those scenarios. You had 16 possibilities, and intentionally we picked up, this is our judgment, our team took a call that we need to pick up, these are the most important, these are the restricting our tunnel vision. So we picked up those 3 scenarios and we deliberated at length. So we gave some name. As I said, we had to give some name to those scenarios. Brave new world, unstable world. These are the 2 extremes that we talked about, and these are the scenarios that we have talked about. The one that we discussed about capitalism versus nation state is actually coming out here, the Brave New World. Brave New World scenario talked about open global economy of strong widespread growth, where the capitalism is there, which is in which powerful private sectors actors have gained virtually dominant influence over the government decisions. So here the capitalism is very much there in this Brave New World scenario. We plotted those scenario. The other side of it, because it is from the Middle East, so we discussed about the instability in the world and all that. So nation comes first, and so that is how it is structured. And in between, we also have another scenario which is status quo, and that is why how the scenarios were created. We also built up the even all those dimensions we plotted in greater details. What may happen in those scenarios? Let's say, for example, I will not get into the details, but Brave New World, talk about it. Economics, the scenario we talked about is resource-rich countries experience high degree of foreign investment, which is there. Asian growth dominates global economy, and I believe it will be there. High economic growth in India driven by strong connectivity to international market. I see a possibility there as well. Energy mix, there will be less of coal and oil and more of renewable energies. So these are and also the geopolitics part. So you need to, when you develop a scenario, get into greater details what that picture would look like, and then you plot for all those relevant scenarios that you think of. One such example, I give one example about Shell, which is the father of scenario planning, I would rather say. And they have done in-depth exercise, and it is now built up in their culture. Scenario planning is in their culture now, in their blood now. Though initially they were not. In 50s and 60s, they were as bureaucratic as any other company. But when Periwick came in scenario planning, he was frustrated. That time, oil price was quite low in around 70s, and then he developed his team developed a scenario in which the price may go up very high, and if that price goes high, then you need to invest more. So they had actually invested in going through the scenario. They took decisions and they invested more, and then this the war came in 1973, Yom Kippur, and then the oil price shot up. And that is how one of the 7 sisters has now become this second one, the second largest oil company. They have been using this. And the second time also, there is another project in North Sea called Troll Gas Project. They were supposed to invest around $6 billion. And that time it was little reverse side of it, and the gas price was high and was manipulated by Russia. But then they plotted a scenario in which the USSR will break down, and the price will come down. So there is no sense of getting into the $6 billion investment. And it actually happened. USSR broke down and the communism ended. And that is why they come through that stage of not investing so much of money out there in the North Sea. So, and then they developed in 1990s. There was one famous scenario they developed on TINA. And presently, if you go to their website, you will read about the Sky scenario as well. So Shell is one of the best example if you look at it from the oil and gas sector. There are many other companies, not only Shell, there are many other international companies also. There is Zurich Financial Services, they used it for degree of change in the industry. Daimler Chrysler Aerospace, they actually used it for robust milestones or signposting. Noranda, this is a Canadian natural gas source company, they use it for portfolio assessment. UPS used it for whether they didn't need to go for national or global and things like that. And so broadly, most of these international companies, they have done it. Yes, in India also we have done it. I'm proud to say that I was there, part of the GAIL strategy team, where we developed our scenario strategy from the scenario planning exercise. So built into our own culture of strategy discussion. BPCL also, they did it. ACC, Larsen Toubro, they use it extensively. So yes, companies are doing it. And if Chandigarh University also wants to do it, we'll be happy to help you in this particular exercise of developing a scenario planning exercise.
Sorry to interject, sir. Another very good question. You were talking about scenario planning at Yale and how you were part of that team. And I remember CMIE was providing you all the data. Absolutely. And I was part of the team from CMIE. So data is the backbone of scenario planning in a way. And there is a related question from Anuj Bansal. He is a student of MBA. And he wants to ask, how will artificial intelligence and big data shape up scenario planning? I think it's a very pertinent question, sir. So can you please throw some light on this, sir?
Okay. Now, in general, we say that we first need to have a picture. In the research work also you first prepare a hypothesis, right? And then you try to do your research work. The hypothesis preparation is, I would rather say that, you test it with your data. Later on, you test it with your data. So the big data, of course, you can use it, how I see it. And it is being used extensively by the social media giants like Facebook and all. What is individual test? How do you put that into particular category? And that maps what is the demand will be there in future. That actually maps what is the future of demand of consumer goods. Your taste, your likings are commanding the future, if you look at it that way. So big data and artificial intelligence will be used in extensive way in scenario planning. In scenario planning, when you build the model, when you build the interaction between the key driving forces, you try to assess, put those data, try to simulate, see a correlation, and you see, okay, yeah, this is what the relation is, and that creates a picture. And companies do it, and so that is why going forward, yes, of course, big data and artificial intelligence will be used extensively in scenario planning. That's a wonderful question, Anuj. And with that, I would say thank you. I believe I have crossed the time. I'm sorry, but the topic was so close to my heart. You can also join our certificate programs and scenario planning if you want. We are having some plan of certificate programs on that. If you are expert in scenario planning, please do join us, our expert team, so that we can take the discussion forward. I would rather now put the question and answer session open. And if you have any other question, feel free to ask me.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a very insightful session and some very pertinent and profound points put forth by you during this session. I'm sure the students would have benefited a lot. But before we let you go, sir, a few more questions from our students. So I'm basically combining some 6 or 7 questions together, and they wanted to ask, what should the students of MBA do to hone their skills in scenario planning? Should they read more? Should they observe more? What should they do, sir?
What should they do is, see, I'll rather say, put it this way. Right now, you ask any company, were they prepared? No, they were not prepared. So because you have been shaken, most of the companies would look for, are you having this kind of skill? So MBA students, I would rather advise to get yourself more into the scenario planning skills. You can do your own study. There are many literature available. You can join our certificate programs also. This will, in which we'll take you through the process of scenario planning, development and testing and all that. But if you are interested to do your research work, there are a lot many things online that you can read. One book is called The Art of Long View. You can read that. There are articles in Shell website. You can get into details how these people do develop. But the challenge is you individually will not be able to do it. You need to have a team together. And you may be wise. You may be a wise person. You may have diversified view. But one person, the moment you say a one-person scenario, it is a failure. One person cannot develop a scenario. You have to have a team. So what I would rather advise you join our programs and certificate programs, and that will help you a lot.
Thank you, sir. Here's another question from Harsh Pratap Singh of MBA second semester. Harsh wants to know that MSMEs who cannot invest or spend a lot of money on hiring big consultants for their scenario planning, what is your advice for small family businesses and the MSME sector?
We are there. You call us, we can help you out there. We are looking at, this is an opportunity to sell, give my marketing as well. ValuEndow is actually an entity which is dedicated towards this MSME. So we'll be keen to help you out. If any of these MSME wants help, we'll be happy to extend our hand.
And sir, for the students of Chandigarh University, probably not with a very big fee.
Okay.
So sir, with this, we come to an end to this very fruitful and very, very engaging session. It had a mix of everything, a mix of poll, it was interactive, and it was amazing, sir. And I can still see around 500 participants. Generally, what happens is if the session is not interesting, we see a lot of students leaving the session, but it is not so with this particular session. There are still 500 students left, and we have come to an end to this session. So with this, we will put a wrap on this session. I, from the bottom of my heart, thank Mr. Manas Das to take out his valuable time to come and address our students in this webinar. And I thank all the panel members. I thank the IT team at Chandigarh University for putting up this beautiful show. And I would like to thank all the students for joining this session. It was you were so overwhelming that we had to stop because we had a limit on the number of registrations. We crossed that limit and there were still more students left to join. I apologize to all the students who could not join because of the limitation or to the number of students, but I promise you that we will bring Mr. Manas Das once again and we will have a similar session, probably a scenario planning part 2 or some other session. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.